Hey guys, I'm back at you with another watercolor chat and semi-tutorial. Today I'm going to walk you guys through the process for painting this Jambalaya illustration. The original sketch and inks were from Lilliputian Living, originally drawn in 2020. I want to make sure to put a link down in the description below if you're interested in tiny people or world building. I think you guys will really check out the book, prose novel, not really sure what to call it, but it's a collection of illustrations and short form prose that I think you guys will really enjoy. So grab your paints, grab your brushes, and let's get painting. So although it's still summer here, I wanted this illustration to have kind of a fall feeling. So I mixed together some ultramarine blue and some burnt umber to create a Payne's gray, and I applied a really light wash of that Payne's gray. Then wet into wet, using a flat watercolor brush, I am adding further saturated washes of Payne's gray to kind of create the effect of a kind of an autumnal sky. And what I really like about this is we're not just going to get one flat color, we're going to get some of the ultramarine blue and some of the burnt umber kind of separating out. And that's one of the reasons why I like both mixed at home Payne's gray as well as from a tube Payne's gray, because they are very, very different colors. I'm using a paper towel to pick up some of the excess water and a spritzer bottle to just kind of encourage some of the movement. I am painting on Stonehenge Aqua cold press watercolor paper. This is a 100% cotton rag watercolor paper that can take a whole lot of water, and I'm definitely going to be throwing a lot of water at the background here. And I am creating this background the night before I really start in on the illustration proper. This is going to give it plenty of time to dry out overnight. So as I'm going, I'm lifting out some areas with a paper towel to kind of create the effect of clouds, and I'm also streaking in some areas with a much darker mix of Payne's gray. Towards the bottom, I also allowed my wide flat watercolor brush to do a bit of dry brush so that we can get some texture and get kind of an interesting application rather than just a flat wash. I'm also doing a little bit of actual grise using our Payne's gray. I'm kind of underpainting in my shadows just to kind of help me depict the light source, which is going to be the fire underneath our jambalaya pot in this illustration. So if you guys aren't familiar, jambalaya is a Louisiana staple. So far as I've been able to figure out, there are two kinds of jambalaya. You've got New Orleans style, which is more of a tomato-based kind of jambalaya, and it's much stickier and wetter. And then you've got Baton Rouge style, which is similar to dirty rice, if you guys have ever had dirty rice, and it's much drier, maybe a bit spicier. It doesn't utilize tomatoes. My preference, despite being from around New Orleans, I grew up hating New Orleans style jambalaya. I thought it was gross. I actually prefer Baton Rouge style jambalaya. But if you've ever had either of them, let me know down in the comments which one you prefer most. And speaking of Louisiana, this is actually the second video that I'm doing narration for post Ida, so things are improving, but my working situation is still a little weird, and I've got news that most of the libraries that I've worked for, most of the libraries in the parish that I teach art classes with, have suffered at least some damage, if not severe damage, which, as you guys know, I am a gig teacher, and that kind of makes my livelihood precarious. So if you enjoy art chats like this one, if you enjoy art tutorials, and if you'd like to see me come back, helping me out by joining me over on Patreon would make that a lot more feasible. So our wash and underpainting has had a chance to dry overnight. Now I can start painting painting properly. Look, I'm just gonna go ahead and apologize. I am doing the voiceover for this after a really long day post Ida, so we're doing hurricane recovery. So I am probably going to be all over myself. I'm probably going to mispronounce things, but you guys love me. You guys are here for me. You guys will forgive me, right? Right. Okay, so for the leaves in the background, I want them to look like bay leaves. Bay leaves are a very common component in Louisiana cuisine, and they originally came from India. So it'd be really interesting to kind of track back when they came into Louisiana and when they became so prevalent in Cajun and Creole cuisines. But I am using ultramarine blue as a base color and then painting on top of them using a little bit of a cooler yellow for that. So, and I'm also doing my very first layer with them using an olive green from Winsor & Newton, and that kind of creates that like warmish green that I've noticed that dried bay leaves have. And bay leaves are not in and of themselves actually edible. They're used as a spice, but you're not supposed to eat them. They can cause severe damage to your stomach. So if you find a bay leaf in your food, it was not improperly cooked. The place isn't dirty. That is perfectly normal, but please do remove it before you consume it. So for the jambalaya frequently has like bell peppers or maybe a little bit of green onion in it. And just to make my painting a little bit easier, I'm masking those areas off with masking fluid first before I start painting the colors for our jambalaya. Now, if you've never had jambalaya, I guess I would say it's a spicy brown. I mean, it contains rice, typically white rice. It contains sausage. It can contain chicken. It contains a lot of spices. I think that's all it No, it also contains like bell peppers and onions, but I think that's about it. And you know, different houses are gonna cook it differently. Like I said, New Orleans style, you might throw some tomato paste in there, but different people do make it differently. I have seen some wild variations from England where I'm like, that might be delicious, but that is not jambalaya. So what I'm going for with the jambalaya is kind of a nice, warm, spicy brown color. And the salt cellar that the little guy over there is holding is actually full of paprika. One of my favorite spices is smoked paprika. I feel like I use it in just about everything. And I feel like food is missing something if it doesn't have it. So I guess like some people, their condiment of choice is sriracha. My condiment of choice would be smoked paprika. So I'm trying to build up the colors in the jambalaya. I am, of course, referencing it, even though I've eaten it a million times. I like to work from reference whenever possible because even though I have a cartoony art style, I try to depict things somewhat realistically. I want people to be able to recognize what they're actually looking at. And then for the sausages, these would be like a smoked andouille sausage or a smoked pork sausage. I wanted to go with a nice, really warm brownish color. So I'm using, I think it's like Imaldazone maroon, something like, or Imaldazone brown. It's a Holbein color. It's not really specific. Generally, when I do these kind of watercolor walkthroughs, my goal isn't for you to paint exactly what I have painted here. Although if you'd like to paint along, I will, in fact, link the lineup for you guys down in the description below. You guys can purchase it through my Gumroad, print it out, and color it yourselves. I would recommend printing it using a toner printer because toner printer ink is water and alcohol marker safe, whereas inkjet printer ink is not. I wanted to keep the color scheme for this illustration fairly simple, revolving around those kind of warm browns and those kind of warmer greens. So I'm going to be repeating a lot of the same colors with some variation over and over and over again. And this is one of the ways that I create kind of a more coherent color scheme. Once upon a time, I thought a color scheme was just all the colors in the rainbow or all the pastels with no real variation in tone or no intentional repetition. But the red and the green look so nice together, and since they're both slightly, well, the red is more of a brownish red and the green is a warmish red. Wow. Green is a warmish green. I told you guys I'd be tripping all over myself today. it doesn't necessarily read as Christmassy. Hopefully it reads as more fall inspired. So in our grise, our underpainting, you guys might notice that I'd already started to kind of block in my glow effects. This makes it a lot easier for me to just render color on top of it and not have to worry too much about the shading. I also went ahead and I started the fire underneath our ceramic bowl, and I just used some wet into wet blending techniques where I painted in a very light warmish yellow for the flames, and then I dabbed in a bit of orange and I dabbed in a bit of scarlet. So with this illustration, I didn't really do anything too exceptional beyond the grise that I did as my underpainting, so I'd really like to just talk about how things have been going post Ida. So there has been a lot of work towards clearing the roads, removing down power lines, removing some of the massive trees that have fallen into the roadways so that people can get back and forth. More people are coming back in after having evacuated, and it's just a lot of hustle and bustle. We also have a lot of people coming in from out of state who are offering housing services or tree removal services. Obviously, this is not for free. They expect to be paid. And it's kind of a mixed situation because some of these people are not licensed. They're not really qualified to do what they're doing. But there's a lot of people who need a lot of help right now. And for many people, just getting a blue tarp up on their roof before the next storm is a massive deal and a priority over hiring someone who's actually licensed to do so. So I'm of kind of two minds about it. One of my bigger problems with it is they drive super aggressively around here, and Louisiana drivers are already kind of aggressive, and they're just kind of adding a lot of congestion and mess and parking to the road in a parking on the road in a situation where there's already a lot of congestion and mess. So I guess if I could tell any of them any one thing, I would ask them to just be like courteous to the people who live here and not just the people who are paying them to do a job. And that while we appreciate that they're here to do a job, they are driving like total jerks. So more businesses are getting up. They're working really hard to get a lot of the gas stations up because we're currently in a gas shortage. And I mean, during any kind of shortage in Louisiana, you see a lot of craziness. Like, for example, during this current gas shortage, we were behind a guy who was filling up a 55-gallon, like, it's like a rain barrel. It is not meant to hold gasoline by any way, shape, or form. It's probably not even meant to hold potable water. He was filling up a 55-gallon drum like it was just normal everyday stuff, and then he took off carting down the road with it. So, you know, during situations like this, you definitely have people who are maybe not making choices that are the best for the society around them. They're thinking very selfishly, but you're always going to have that in these kind of situations. But at least we are having more gas stations open up. My brother had to sit in a 4-hour line the other day to get gas. And when we went to get gas, we were waiting for about an hour and 40 minutes. We went before him, so I don't know why his line was so bad, but that's just to give you guys some idea of kind of what life's like right now. Walmart opened up recently, so that was a big deal. People can, and Winn-Dixie, so people can get groceries and get staples and get cat food. And the National Guard, the Coast Guard, is actually out at one of the parks giving out water and MREs and tarps and ice. And the ice is really important because think about it. A lot of people don't have power. They have fridges full of food, freezers full of food. They need a way to keep that perishable food good. Ice is going to be how you're going to do it until you have power again. And I got to tell you guys, opening up a freezer full of meat that has been rotting for a week because the power has been out is, I mean, it's really an unimaginably bad smell. And I've already lived that life once with Katrina. nobody wants to live that life again with Ida. But it does actually seem like people have learned a lot from Katrina. It seems like we're recovering a lot faster. After Katrina, it took a month to get back to Louisiana after evacuating to Texas, and then it took months for things in Luling to recover. And even though St. Charles Parish was hit pretty hard, it seems like they're recovering fairly quickly. It seems like they've got a better plan of action for recovery after Katrina, which is really heartening to see. I'm so glad that we're actually able to kind of learn from what we've been through and make this a more livable place. So in the poolside watercolor chat, I kind of talked about, people can't necessarily understand why we would live in a place like this worrying about hurricanes. And I kind of talked about how every place has its thing that makes it a challenge to live there. And my friends up north have had a few hundred years to figure out how to live up north. And in Louisiana, we've always had hurricanes, but the intensity is getting worse. Like Ida had winds of 170 miles per hour, possibly up. It had a bunch of tornadoes. There were areas that flooded. I mean, you can prepare for these things, but man, Ida hit hard. My mom has storm shutters on her house. She has a generator on her house, and we were terrified that like the windows were going to break. So you can prepare for things, but sometimes they can still take you by surprise. But I do think Louisiana is preparing. I do think Louisiana is learning. And I think the people who live here are figuring out ways that we can kind of tough out the storm. And I was also kind of wondering, what do the animals do during a hurricane like this? Like, where do the bears go? Where do the coyotes go? Where do the deer go? Even though I have a minor in earth environmental science, we didn't really talk about that. And I mean, birds can migrate, insects can burrow, but with these larger animals, where do they go when the weather gets really rough? I would definitely be interested in learning more about that and maybe doing like a picture book about it. So while I'm watching myself paint, I'm thinking how fortunate this past me was. And I don't begrudge her, but I did want to talk to you guys kind of about what my studio situation is going to look like until we have regular electricity across St. Charles Parish. And forecasts say that's not going to be until the end of September, but I'm kind of hopeful that they can maybe get it up faster than that, because they sure are working hard to get things up. So right now I am in my childhood bedroom. That's basically all the space we have to call our own. It's me, Joseph, and Bowie. And there's a corner in the room that I've already I'm eyeballing it. It's full of mess right now, but I'm eyeballing it to put a desk in and try to get kind of a makeshift painting area set up, because I kind of find a lot of solitude in painting. I think I talked about that in Poolside, where, people do coloring for relaxation and they do Zentangles. Well, painting is that for me, and I haven't really been able to find the time or the space to kind of center myself and be able to relax. We've been spending every day going back and forth from Luling to Norco to Destrehan to Norco as many times as possible, trying to move stuff out of our Norco rental into our home in Destrehan. And by the time I get home, I'm just tired and wrecked, and then I'm expected to help make dinner. So by the time I finish for the day, I'm just shot. I'm really, really tired. And I'm hoping once we've finished moving stuff out of Norco, and hopefully the end is in sight, I'll be able to start carving out some time in the evenings to focus on painting or getting back to reviewing things. Not because there is necessarily this big external force to do so, but because it's something that makes me happy, and it's something that helps me relax, and it's something that kind of helps me stay calm when things can be rough and when things can be stressful. And I definitely need that. Anyone who's had to go live at home with their parents again and kind of cram themselves back into the nest can probably, you're grateful to have the place, you're grateful to have a roof over your head, but there's always going to be friction and tensions that come from having kind of outgrown the nest and then going back into the nest. But I am really grateful that my mom has allowed us to stay here and that we have electricity and we have air conditioning, because there's so many people down here in Louisiana suffering through 104-degree days. They don't have any electricity. They don't have a running fridge. They don't have cold water. If they're lucky, they have clean water to drink, but right now our taps are still not, we're still under a boil advisory. They can't cool down with the AC. They can't necessarily cool down with a cool shower. And then, like, for a lot of people, like, half their house has been wrecked or their house has been flooded. So I'm very grateful that we haven't seen that kind of, like, us personally, we haven't seen that kind of devastation. But there's a lot of people in our immediate area who are really having a hard time right now. But it seems like most people are trying to get through this with as positive a spirit as possible. I mean, that's kind of like, I've noticed that's kind of like the Louisiana point of view in general. Either you laugh about something, you cry about something, or you pick a fight about something. And it does seem like people are generally taking the either laugh about it or pick a fight about it sort of approach, which, I don't know, I guess that's how we can live here for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and put up with the hurricanes and get through the hurricanes. And there's also a lot of people really trying to help one another, really trying to find ways to make sure that their neighbors get what they need. And, you know, that's wonderful. And something else I've noticed that our area has improved about is, like, in the past, people with pets really had a debate to deal with when evacuating, because most hotels, most motels will not allow pets. So yeah, you could sneak your pet in with varying luck, especially if it's like a bigger animal. And then, you know, hotels and motels that do allow pets are fewer and farther between, especially for people who are trying to evacuate from a hurricane. You might not be able to go stay with family and bring your pet. So a lot of people historically have chosen to stay because they weren't going to just abandon this animal. And it's nice to see that St. Charles Parish is offering resources for people who have pets and need help, as well as they're recommending shelters and hotels for people who have pets and want to leave or need to leave and need somewhere to stay and are not going to just abandon their animal. So that's another big improvement over Katrina. So you guys can see with the clothing, I've kind of picked a color scheme and I'm repeating it. I've got the kind of yellow ochre, I've got reddish tones, I've got buff tones, I've got browns, and I've got reds. And I'm basically kind of changing them where I put them. So all of the characters shown here are wearing some of those colors, but I'm really trying to vary my placement where those colors are on that character in regards to their clothes, the saturation of the color, as well as like how blue or how red that color is, like the temperature of that color. And that creates kind of a cohesive color scheme. I mean, it's a chef and his 3 assistants, so a bit of a uniform feel is good. It kind of ties them all together, but it also helps tie the illustration together. So now that I've got the clothes mostly rendered out, I've gone and I've grabbed a different clean ceramic palette. I like this one because the daisy shape, you can mix a bunch of different skin tones in it without them kind of running into each other and polluting them. Without them running into each other and polluting each other. With the other palette, its shape, it's just a plate from Dollar Tree, and if you tend to overload your brush with water, all the colors seem to run into the center. With this, I can actually mix up lighter washes and they're not going to pollute one another, so it allows me to mix up a few distinct skin tones. And I really wanted to use this as an opportunity to just kind of show some of the diversity that we have here in Louisiana in terms of how people look and where they come from. Now that I've got the base skin tones painted, I'm also going to go in and add a little bit of the shadow color for this. And generally, depending on how dark the skin tone is, I might do that as my very first step to help establish the shadows and blushes in that skin tone, or I might wait until the very end as kind of just the finishing touches to kind of help pull everything together. But since I'm painting 4 people at once, I'm going to utilize as much of the same colors that can be repurposed as possible, so I'm applying it all in one go. And this is also going to help me assess how the skin tones are going and decide if I want to make any of them darker. Generally with skin tones, I like to build them up over several layers. So I have at least 3, usually, my highlight, my mid-tone, and my shadow tone. And that's not including the kind of contrasting colors that I frequently like to use as shadow colors for the skin tones. So generally when I'm mixing skin tones and I want to apply like a shadow, I'm thinking like red violets, red mauves, red purples, that sort of thing, because it's a contrast color to the browns and to the ochres that I typically like to use for skin tones. It's a little bit cooler, so it kind of has that look of being a cast shadow, but there's still a liveliness to it that I wouldn't necessarily have if I used like an indigo or a neutral tint or a Payne's gray or something else that's like a very easy, quick, immediate, obvious sort of shadow color. That has a tendency to deaden skin tones, and there are instances where that can be really useful, like if you're painting an underwater scene or if you're painting a forest scene and it's darker and there's a lot of heavy greens, then those kind of colors could be really useful for using as shadow colors on people. But generally, just as a rule of thumb for myself, I really like to think in the warmer red violets, red purple sort of category. This was a pretty quick illustration to paint because I had a pretty strong vision of where I wanted the colors and what kind of atmosphere I wanted for this illustration. Generally, when I have a really good idea of how I want it to feel, it comes together much quicker. Now, yes, I could be doing mock-ups digitally or even using color pencils just to get an idea for the color palette, and that is what an intelligent person would do. But I guess I like to work by whim. And just kind of see how the colors play next to each other and be surprised. So it depends on the project. If I were doing something for someone else, say like a wedding portrait or painting their kids, then I probably would submit a color comp to them just to make sure that everything looks good to them. But if I'm just painting for myself and painting for enjoyment, I typically go where the spirit takes me. I go with whatever I feel like looks good in the moment. And sometimes I have made some regrettable color choices, and sometimes I've made some inspired color choices, and generally I tend to overwork the piece. So, you know, I'm a big learning by doing kind of person. As somebody with ADHD, there's lots of great advice out there, and I'm gonna learn how to do it the hard way. So at this point, everything has mostly come together. I'm mainly just adding in additional shadows, kind of tweaking the skin tones or building up the skin tones to what I had in mind. I'm started rendering the hair and adding details to the hair, adding details to the clothing, adding the darker reflections on metals, that sort of thing. But this is kind of just the playing it by eye, seeing what looks right to you, maybe taking a break, getting a snack, coming back, reevaluating, that sort of thing. So once I've mostly finished with the watercolors and everything's had a chance to dry, I can start going in with watercolor pencils. But I'd stepped away from it from a little bit, or for a little bit, kind of let my eyes and my brain readjust, and decided that I wanted to add in some darker shadows from the fire, kind of like behind the fire pit, the ring of pebbles that I've put around the spider, just to kind of help keep the fire from getting away from them. I wanted to add some darker cast shadows there just to kind of help create. So the more you paint shadows, the more you can kind of indicate light, and the darker the shadows, generally the brighter the light. And while that might be kind of a cliche adage that people like to throw at you when you're going through hard times, it's also true for art and rendering light in illustration. But I am using some of my favorite watercolor pencils just to kind of add in some rim lighting, clean a few things up, add a few details. Mainly I am using kind of a buff white, which is a warmer white color. I'm using a really light, really creamy yellow, and that's going to be great for adding in some glow from the fire. And I'm also using your kind of standard white, which is kind of a bluish white, and I'm mostly just adding in some rim lighting to show the light cast by the fire itself. And I am using Caran d'Ache's Museum Aquarelle watercolor pencils. I am using Derwent Inktense pencils, and I'm using Caran d'Ache Supercolor 2 pencils. Those are my preferred watercolor pencils. Now, I have reviewed a lot of watercolor pencils, and I have found a lot of duds, but those are, in my opinion, some of the best watercolor pencils, with my two favorites being the Museum Aquarelle and the Derwent Inktense. So before I ever started painting this illustration, I inked it with a Sakura Pigma FB brush pen. This is a waterproof brush pen. I've been using them for most of the Lilliputian, if not all of the Lilliputian Living series that I've been kind of working through. And when you paint on top of black ink, it can kind of dull the black ink, it can kind of muddy it, and it can kind of cause a shift in the contrast of your illustration. So one of the things I like to do once I finish painting, and sometimes after I've added the watercolor pencil, is go back in and re-ink some areas. That's going to add that contrast back in, and it's also going to add some additional clarity to the piece. This is particularly useful if you like to ink your illustrations and you find that they feel muddy afterwards. Not all watercolors are equally transparent or opaque. Some are more transparent, some are more opaque, and some of them are going to leave a bit of a film on top of your inks. So it can be really helpful to go back, re-ink, and clean it up. And then for my final touches, I'm using some white gouache to add some highlights, some rim lighting, and just to kind of create the illusion of light hitting objects. Once everything has had a chance to dry fully and completely, it is time to remove our blue painter's tape. I'm using 3M's low tack blue painter's tape. I'm using the 1.75 inch painter's tape, and this is the crepe finish rather than the delicate surface finish. I find that the foam delicate surface tape tends to tear up my watercolor paper. When I am removing it from the structure boards, I always try to pull away at a 90-degree angle. And voila, we are finished. I hope you guys enjoyed hanging out and chatting with me, hopefully painting along on your own project, or maybe you printed this one out and you wanted to paint along with me. If you're looking for more straightforward watercolor tutorials, check the description below. I've got a bunch of great ones for you guys where I kind of walk you guys step through my process. So I feel like I've really covered kind of the basics of watercolor in several playlists designed to get you guys painting and designed to help make art a habit in your life. So I hope you guys will check that out. So for now, I just enjoy painting, maybe pointing out some of the interesting things I'm doing or some of the techniques that I enjoy, and just kind of chatting with you guys about what's going on in my life. Because between COVID and hurricanes, I think we're all going a little bit stir crazy and maybe getting a little bit lonely. So hopefully these watercolor art chats have been a joy in your life. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed them, and hopefully they're helping you make art a priority, make art every day, and helping you guys make art a habit. If you guys liked this video, it'd mean a lot to me if you left a thumbs up and maybe a comment. Like I said, let me know what kind of jambalaya you like down in the comments below. It's gonna take me a while to get back to you guys because I have really sporadic internet right now. I have to kind of upload stuff when I actually have a small window of internet to be able to do so, but it doesn't mean I don't love hearing from you guys, and I'm really looking forward to a day when things are more back to normal, when I have a studio space again, and when I can live stream and hang out with you guys. So art chats, watercolor chats, and tutorials like this one are brought to you guys thanks to the support of my amazing patrons. You guys will see their names right here. Thank you guys so much for believing in me and for your support. It really means a lot to me and I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope I'll see you guys again soon. Bye guys!